Good morning. I'm very humbled and excited to moderate this discussion between two people who are particularly well-suited to talk about disrupting the status quo through elected office, but particularly at the local level. So to my left is Adrian Perkins. He is a 2008 graduate of the most prestigious military academy in the United States, West Point.
Agreed.
He commissioned as a field artillery officer, completed deployments in Iraq and Afghanistan, came home, and went to a little law school in Boston called Harvard, and graduated this past May. He spent most of his third year of law school splitting time between his hometown of Shreveport, Louisiana, and Boston when he decided to run an exploratory committee and ultimately made the decision to run for mayor of his hometown in Shreveport. And so right now he is in the middle of that campaign and taking a break from knocking on doors to join us today. Yeah. We also have Sam Innocent. Sam is a native of Brooklyn, New York. He's a 2013 scholar. He has his bachelor's degree from City College in New York in political science. He's particularly passionate about veterans advocacy issues and really got into this political world through kind of student advocacy work at City College. He then was on the mayor's commission for vets and is in the last year of his term in that position. He's planning to run for council, city council, and county committee, right, in the next year. Mm-hmm. And so he's particularly looking to work with the community in Brownsville, the neighborhood in Brooklyn. And so they're going to talk to us today about an issue that's particularly important. And for some context, we're looking at the role of public servants who are then transitioning into elected office and disrupting what we're calling the status quo. And so for context, right now, there's about 2 million post-9/11 veterans. There's also about 1 million veterans or alumni of AmeriCorps, so Teach for America and all the AmeriCorps services. There's also about 230,000 Peace Corps alumni. Yet we're at an all-time low in people with service experience serving in elected office. And maybe coincidentally or not, about 4 to 8% of the American public, depending on the poll you look at, have what they would call great confidence in Congress to solve their problems. And only 44% have faith in their local and state government to solve that problem. So that's where I want to start, is talking about your decisions to run for local office as opposed to national level. And specifically, Adrian, your decision to go back home to Shreveport and run particularly for mayor.
Oh, yeah. Shreveport, I've always been an ambassador for my hometown. I grew up in a neighborhood in Shreveport that was low income, very high crime area. My mother raised me and my 2 older brothers. My father left when I was about 4 years old. So, you know, when you grow up in circumstances like that and to have gone off and gone to West Point and Harvard, that's not the usual story. And I very much attribute my story to my community. There were football coaches, neighbors, there were, you know, people at church that really helped my family out and poured into me. So I always felt indebted to Shreveport. So that's where my heart was. So whenever I was thinking about, hey, how can I continue serving, I thought about home first. And yeah, the national stage seems very appealing. I would say they do need a little help there right now. But you know, my heart was at home, and from a practical standpoint as well, I was realistic because the point is to get veterans in office, and the point is for me to serve. So with my timeline, it was extremely abbreviated, and the jurisdiction of Shreveport is much smaller than if I were to run for Congress or something like that. So there was some practical elements in my decision too. But yeah, like I said, at the end of the day, the goal was to go back and give my hometown, you know, my service directly.
And we had talked a little bit about how difficult the partisan discussion is at the national level right now, and the difference at the local level and where you can make an impact.
Oh, yeah. And that's another thing. At the local level, I'm extremely insulated from the ideological polarization that's going on at the national level. And I think that's a good thing. In reality, we are a lot more alike than we are different. So at the local level, our values are much more apparent. You know, the mayor needs to figure out how to have an efficient water system and how to pick up people's trash and, you know, represent the city appropriately, or economic development. And you really don't get into the ideological battles that too often separate us on the national scale. So yeah, I think I very much take some comfort in that at the local level.
And Sam, the three of us were talking about, both of you are focused on both decreasing crime and increasing opportunities in your communities. You specifically right now are running for an office that will get you involved with county judges or local judges in selection of, and then also looking forward to a campaign at the city council level. Can you talk about what problems you hope to address in both and kind of how you're getting yourself ready to approach those campaigns?
Yeah, so especially in Brownsville, if you were to, let's say after this session and go Google Brownsville, the first things that'll come up are shooting in Brownsville, crime in Brownsville, robbing spree in Brownsville. It's not known to be a neighborhood that's particularly well off, right? It's known for its crime rates, it's known for its poverty rate. So my decision to come back home and help my own neighborhood was, after being in the military, you see the world, you see the change that you've made in other countries and other places. I said, why can I not do the same back home in an area that needed it the most? So some of the beginner issues are, you can call them the issues that I'll take on when I decide to make that run, both in county committee and in city council, is to identify community policing and how it could work and should work, right? Because in Brownsville, the way the NYPD and the police force works is that you're assigned a particular area. So now with community policing, if you've joined in out of neighboring neighborhoods like East Flatbush and the communities that surround Brownsville, you're more likely to identify with the people who you've grown up with, right? So then policing and how people are treated looks a little differently, because you know the policeman is your local neighbor, and they may identify issues before they actually become an issue of, okay, for instance, one of the topics that came up in a recent discussion was someone jumping a turnstile. New York City has a phenomenal public transportation system, but it doesn't always work as it should. So that being said, when a person of juvenile background jumps a turnstile in order to either get to school or get to their next location, and they get picked up by police, there's a process, right, that leads to a lot of different, many different correlations as to why it becomes a much bigger issue than just jumping a turnstile to get over, this $275 fare to get to where you're going. Because after that, you now have court dates. If you're a child in high school, right, you're missing school to go to a court date, you may miss the court date. Now you have a warrant. Now you're 16, 17 years old and you have a warrant out for your arrest because you missed a court date because you jumped a turnstile trying to get to school, and then you're going to sit down before a local judge who will then pass sentence on that. So as county committee, the people who nominate and appoint local judges, right, it's beholden upon us to make sure that the judge is either from the area or recognizes the many issues that are compounded in this one particular type of case, and then pass a sentence accordingly. That way you don't have people like Khalif Broder, who ends up in Rikers Island for 3 years for supposedly, I'll say allegedly, stealing a backpack, and then later committed suicide when he got out.
So I want to go back to something you mentioned about Brownsville's reputation. So the New York Daily News has called it the worst neighborhood in the country for children, and then Time Magazine's called it the most dangerous neighborhood in New York. That's overwhelming. How do you look at that and understand the reputation of your community and pick an issue or decide how you're going to make a tangible change when it is that big of a problem?
It's a phenomenal question, and it's something that I recognize every day. Every day that I live in Brownsville, every day that I step outside my house, I see it, right? I see it firsthand. And rather than focus on, what these big publications say, I try to focus on the small issue and the very initial start that I can make that I feel would make a difference. So in my neighborhood, it was putting up a stop sign. Yeah. Right? You have to start somewhere. So, you worked hard, you lobby the elected officials, you speak to who you're supposed to speak to get a stop sign put up. That way, a young child can now cross the street to get to school. The neighborhood becomes a little bit safer. People recognize you for who you are and what you did for the neighborhood, and now they're attentive to the larger issues that you're trying to tackle, and they buy into the political system. Because for better or worse, people don't necessarily trust elected officials in New York or feel that they've done anything for them. But when you can put a face to a name, to an object, such as a stop sign in a neighborhood, you begin to get buy-in from the community, and now you have a platform to make a bigger and more effective change, such as community policing or making K through 6 education just a little bit stronger. That way it's no longer the worst neighborhood for children in New York.
Adrian, you've approached similar problems. You've also are running in Shreveport that has been identified as one of the fastest shrinking economies in the United States.
Oh, yeah.
One solution that you've proposed is expanding access to wireless technology.
Yeah.
How do you sell a policy idea like that to the community? How do you get some traction behind that? And why that issue?
Yeah, well, before I even decided to run, I did the exploratory period and asking, whether or not people would support a new face. I was also asking about issues, and what I quickly realized is that jobs and crime were the two big things that people were concerned about. And it's interesting because this is my first time being a politician or whatever. So I read books and talked to people, and I had this fancy 8-point plan. And within the first week, I was like, this is not going to work at all. So people really are concerned about job opportunities. It's estimates that Shreveport has lost about 30,000 jobs since the mid '90s. So in talking about anything that'll attract jobs, people are listening to it. So yeah, broadband internet and fiber optic and all that is pretty fancy stuff. So we've very much had to, bring it to the people to help them realize hey, this will help our economy. And in doing that, I talk about other cities that have done it. Chattanooga, Tennessee, for instance, cut their unemployment rate in half. They went from 8% to 4% within 10 years. And their average income went up $20,000 because they pursued this high-speed internet throughout the city. Right now in Shreveport, as Ashley already pointed out, we have the slowest growing economy out of any metropolitan area in the country. And we've lost those 30,000 jobs. And the average salary in Shreveport, well, let me not say the average salary, over half of Shreveport makes less than $40,000. So over half of Shreveport is right at the poverty line, flirting with the poverty line. So they are very receptive to any ideas about bringing jobs. And I mean, the bolder, the better. Right now, people have told me I'm the only candidate with a vision for Shreveport to actually get out of the stoop that it's in. So I think that we figured out a way to really tap into something with talking about broadband, and that ties into the crime problems that we have as well.
Yeah, and so I wanted to go to the crime problem next because you've made some bold statements and called for the chief of police to be replaced.
Yes.
Simultaneously, you're a really young candidate for office with no political experience.
Yeah.
How have you navigated that?
Yeah, well, I don't mind being bold. Politics is a pretty aggressive game. I think in Shreveport and Louisiana, it's a particularly aggressive game. But yeah, you got to be bold with it. I got my courage in uniform just like everyone else in the crowd. So yes, I have made that statement about the police chief, and I was joking with Ashley earlier. I told her my campaign committee wanted me to put Adrian Perkins for mayor on the side of my car. And I'm like, I'm not doing that. That's the fastest way to get a ticket. So, so yeah, but in all seriousness, crime is a big issue in our city. Numerically, we had 57 homicides last year. 7 they say were justifiable. We came out as 18th on the most murderous city in the United States list. I'm wondering where Brownsville in New York is on it. Yeah. The bigger problem is perception as well. Out of those 57 homicides today, over 40 of those homicides remain unsolved. And even if we had 5 homicides, you quickly realize when you're in these neighborhoods that even if it was 5, that person was, that family's world. So our current mayor has said, her response to that is that the numbers are going down, and it's not compassionate enough for the people, and the people feel very distant from that response. So I've been very much engaged, and I've told them, hey, these are policies that we can pursue, new policies, because there can never be, our community can never be safe enough. And the first, I start with the police chief, who doesn't bring the competencies or the time to the job. And what I mean by that is before he was the police chief, he was a school resource officer. So I don't know, many of you might have gone to high school and there was a police officer there who, stood in the cafeteria and walked people to in-school suspension. Well, that's his background. It has nothing to do with the murders that I was just talking about. It has nothing to do with the burglaries that also plague our city. So he lacks some operational skills with the job. Also, his time. He's a full-time pastor. So in Shreveport, we're paying him about $160,000 a year to be a full-time police chief, and he's not doing that right now. So that's the reason why, I have no qualms about saying he needs to be removed. Second to that, I've talked about community policing, starting off in the form of police substations in our neighborhood. Right now, we have a centrally located police department in the downtown area that is a huge burden on our police department. Because if somebody stays, by the way, just to give you some context of Shreveport, Shreveport is has the land mass of Cincinnati, Ohio, but we have the population, I think we have 1/10 of the population. So it's a really big city when it comes to area. So some police officers that are out in the outskirts of Shreveport, when they have to go and check in the morning and get their brief, they have to drive all the way to the downtown area, then have to drive back to their neighborhoods, patrol, drive back to the downtown area to do their debrief, and then drive back to the neighborhoods to patrol. So we're losing money with gas, we're losing money with time that these police officers can be on the street. So police substations would get after that from an economic standpoint, but also tie those police officers closer to the communities that they're serving. They can spend more time there actually getting to know the kids playing, basketball in the street. They can meet the grandmothers that's, sitting on their porches. And right now, there is a big gap between our community and our police officers. So that's the way I'm proposing we get after that problem with the police department.
A lot of things you're talking about, building relationships, building communities, are all the things that military leaders do. And so, Sam, I want to come to you and talk a little bit about the board you served on, you still currently serve on, and the role you see for veterans in not only policy making, but just in being community leaders, and where you see those opportunities.
Yeah, so I'll start with the board that I sit on. So upon graduating City College, through student veteran advocacy, I was appointed to the New York City Veterans Advisory Board, and I was a mayoral appointee. So appointed by Mayor de Blasio to serve a 3-year term to sit on this board and advise on all things veteran. From that, we created the newest and youngest city agency, which is the Department of Veteran Services for New York, which centralizes all veteran services that come in through New York City, and then veterans now have one place where they can come to receive all the types of services that they may need. So that advocacy and that start is what sort of led me down the path in which I am now.
So let me redirect a little bit on this, because I think what we see sometimes, especially our frequent Twitter users, everyone sees veterans are often deferred to just by virtue of their service. And certainly there is a role for veterans in the political space, but it's probably not also an automatic check of credibility or qualification. And so I think we need to talk a little bit about what that role looks like, and then specifically when we're talking the topic of this panel being disrupting the status quo, how are those experiences you had in uniform translating to your ability to facilitate that change in a community?
So the untapped potential of veteran leadership across the board to bring a number of different people together from different backgrounds and different walks of life. For instance, when I was in the military serving as a medic, I met people from Tennessee who had never come in contact with an African-American male before, right? And the amount of conversation that we had in that first week through basic training was phenomenal. If I could touch back to that conversation right now, it'd be an instant New York Times bestseller, right? So reaching back to those experiences, veterans have this untapped potential of just leadership and bringing different groups and factions together under one cause, one mission, one goal to be accomplished, right? And that's where I think the potential lies. And you see it in veterans such as Seth Meyers, who sat in Congress, the veterans who are running now for Congress and have in the past, right? The potential to reach across the aisle and say, these are our issues. This is where we stand on these issues, but this is where the middle ground is, and this is why it makes sense. This is why it has to get done. Veterans, as you mentioned, have an instant credibility of a face that you can trust, right? Because of the willingness to serve, right? That contract where you sign on the dotted line that says, I will serve this country against all enemies, foreign and domestic, automatically gets you an instant level of, we can call it street credibility, right? But as you also mentioned, it doesn't necessarily give you the proper tools to say, I can step into this role and do what I need to do. That's proven through the project that you do, through calling out big shots like saying the chief of police needs to be replaced, right? But it takes bold statements like that from people who are willing to make them, and I believe that veterans are those people who can both make bold statements, right? Cut through the red tape and the thick of things and take that leadership potential and bring these groups, these city agencies, organizations, even just other elected officials together, sit them down in a room and say, this is why this needs to happen, and this is how we can make that happen.
So a lot of that's relationship based, right? That keeps coming up. And I think, Adrian, one thing I think a lot of veterans struggle with when they think about running for office is getting that home base back.
Yeah.
And so you left Shreveport, you went to West Point, you went to Harvard, you were gone for years. You came home and had to put your roots back down before you could run. Can you talk a little bit about how that works?
Yeah. So I left Shreveport, but again, I was always Shreveport's big ambassador, and I went back as often as I could as well. So I was inducted into my high school's Hall of Fame when I was about 26. I think I'm the second youngest inductee because how often I came back. Like if I wasn't deployed or training for deployment, I was back in my hometown. I've spoken at just about every high school there. I've spoken at many of the middle schools there. I donate to a bunch of causes in the city. So even though I physically wasn't there, I was always, I always had my pulse on Shreveport. So having that foundation of people to support me wasn't super difficult starting off, but running for mayor, the city's 200,000 people. You can be the most popular person in town and you're not even coming in contact with half, even a quarter of the people you need to know in order to take on a feat like that. So it has definitely been some challenges that I did not foresee as far as building a team and getting name recognition in my community, despite everything that I had done before. So yeah, it was very, very challenging. But I'd like to touch on a point that Sam was talking about as far as veterans, because I will say, I just want to highlight how being a veteran has personally benefited me, in addition to being courageous and calling out the police chief, but also in building teams, in having the courage to walk in any neighborhood and having the confidence to carry on a conversation with no matter who comes to the door. But also how it benefits us as a country. Again, as veterans, we pledge to the Constitution of our country, not to a party. And unfortunately, that's what we see in politics, again, far too often today, is that people's pledge is to a party rather than to the country or to our community. So that's where veterans, I think, come in, and I'm always encouraging veterans. As a matter of fact, there was a Republican former Marine who was one of the city councilmen who endorsed me a couple days ago. So yeah, we know that, and I think the American public knows that as well. It's just, we got to make sure once we do get in office that we continue to uphold those values and not the ones of, what politicians are doing today.
Certainly the Gallup poll that has that really low rating for confidence in Congress has a very high rating for confidence in the military, highest ranking among institutions in the United States. So everything you're saying is absolutely true. And veterans and other service-connected alumni are well positioned to do this, but it's terrifying and big and scary, and fundraising sounds terrible. Yeah. So, yeah. Sam, how do you get started? How did you decide on the position you wanted to run for, and just how do you address this huge challenge?
So, for better or worse, I decided on Brownsville because it's one of those neighborhoods where if you get something done, you're a hero. If you get nothing done, it's still Brownsville. That's going to be a soundbite. So I came back to Brownsville because it was the people who I identified with most, and it's where I identified the most need, right? In my previous life in the military, we can call it something as simple, and a lot of the physicians in the room will call it triage, right? It's identifying where I could be of the most impact with the tools that I had at the moment. So I knew that I can come to Brownsville, and if I give it my best effort, that I can get things done and help a population that's traditionally has been marginalized and ignored. And that alone, in and of itself, would have been an accomplishment enough for me to feel like I'd done the best that I could for this particular neighborhood. Now, as far as veterans, touching back on veterans getting involved, I think veterans have the unique capability of translating service to office, right? And you see it with people like Aaron Scheinberg, who's running for Congress now in, I believe it's West Virginia. He worked for the Mission Continues, and now he's transitioning all his lessons learned and all the things that he's applied both throughout his military career and his service career thereafter into elected office. And I think that's what people relate to the most, right? They recognize the name and they recognize the face and they say, oh yes, this, Sam Innocent, he's the guy that put the stop sign up. This is why I believe in him, right? The action, the service through action is what brought the confidence and in the public population of where I serve currently in Brownsville. And I think that's what veterans do well, right? We take the actions that have been previously applied, whether it be through military service or whether what we're doing in the community at the moment, and we can translate that into public office, which is why, again, like Adrian, I encourage people to run and get involved, and don't be afraid of, campaign financing and raising money, because you'd be surprised, right? They say the way to start is to the way to get a taste for raising money and throwing fundraisers is to ask 20 of your nearest family members for $20. Right, and then you'll begin to get a real flavor for the way my bank account works. Come see me in a few weeks, right?
It is very true.
Right,
Yeah,
but then you get a vote of confidence of people ask the questions that everyone should ask when it comes to financing and fundraising. What are you going to do with this money? And then you start on a path or on a dialogue of, well, this is what I plan to do when I'm in office, and it only snowballs into what becomes your entire platform.
Can you kind of speak to the same?
Yeah, I can. I want to talk about fundraising as well. It's fun at this point, but originally, I'm going to be honest, after the first 2 weeks of calling people and asking for money, I was definitely ready to drop out. I was like, this is not fun at all. Because, we're Tillman scholars. A lot of us are extremely independent. We don't like to ask people for anything. We like to give more, and it was just difficult. And it kept me up at night, and I'm like, I'm not sure this is what I want to do. But you eventually get into the swing of things. And I say that because I say, just to go back and touch on your point about how bold of a move it is to run for office. A lot of people in this room might have thought about it, maybe thinking about it right now, maybe doing it. But it is a bold move, and I liken it to my experiences in Ranger School. Ranger School is a huge, huge feat if you're looking at it holistically. Just as you were talking about, Brown, if you look at the whole thing, it can be extremely overwhelming, but you just got to take it a day at a time. Just like any other task, any other large task that we've accomplished. If you just take it a day at a time, you'll learn how to make those phone calls. You'll eventually get used to it and understand that it's a necessity for you actually going out and changing your community. You'll learn how to build that political team, although that political team is going to be a little different than when you worked on a staff or when you were, leading a platoon or whatever leadership position you held. Again, those things that right now seem so far-fetched and so difficult to do, once you get into the mix, you're gonna knock it out. At the beginning of the campaign, I was telling my team, I was walking in 100-degree heat or just about 100 degrees for a couple hours a day, and then I would have to immediately transition to go and do a fundraiser or talk to people. And I was telling my team, I'm like, I'm exhausted. I'm talking to people and I'm just not really, I can't do it. And they were like, no, just keep doing it and you'll get used to it. And lo and behold, you get used to it. So yeah, it seems very daunting if you look at it and holistically, but if you just realize that it's unlike any other challenge that we faced in the room, and that end state is that you, as a veteran, you as someone who loves this country is going to be in that seat opposed to someone else with other motives. If you look at that and you understand that, it'll absolutely get you over the hump and you'll be able to knock it out.
When you're first starting this, what are your resources to figure out how to get yourself started? Like, I imagine you didn't just call mom and start asking for money. Like, you had somebody talking to you about how you were going to get started.
Yeah. You want me to go with this one?
No,
You can both speak to it. So.
Yeah, I'll jump on first, and then that way, anything that I say, you can pick up on.
Just use you.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
The way I got started was I actually volunteered on a fundraising campaign. So again, it's back to the anecdote of if you help raise a lot of money, you're a hero. If you don't help raise any money, there was somebody else on the team too. So I jumped on a campaign and I helped in their financing department, making the calls, planning the small get-togethers, and sort of coming up with bullet points to explain once the actual get-together happened of why we're raising money, what we would use as our platform in order to move this particular neighborhood, this particular district, this particular county forward. So that's where I got my ground game experience from and how I learned from other elected officials. And we were talking about it earlier, where I feel sometimes the best lessons learned are actually in the loss, right? Because if you win, you have an sort of idea of what you did right, but when you lose, you know everything that you would have done better, right? So win or lose, I think volunteering on a campaign and jumping in to see how door knocking works, how the ground team works, how fundraising actually happens, and the things that you're responsible for as a small faction of this much larger team helps tremendously.
Yeah. And I'm gonna have to say, he says the best lessons are learned when you lose. I'm actually not trying to learn that lesson right now. It started off with me. I was going into my third year of law school. I was elected Harvard student body president a couple months prior, and it was a video that one of my coaches. It was a video that I recorded in campaigning for that position that one of my middle school, high school coaches took that video and he put it. My middle school was having an open house. And he put the video into my middle school's open house, kind of implying to these kids, if they go to my middle school, they go to Harvard Law School next, which was hilarious. But the video kind of went viral locally, and I got some phone calls about running for office. And like I said, I already had a bit of a network at home, but I had no intentions on coming back right after law school. I actually wanted to go and work at Sidley Austin, whose main corporate office is here in Chicago. It's a corporate law firm. So I was planning on doing that for a while, saving some money, and then coming back home. So I get a couple phone calls because of that video, and it's some pretty prominent people in town that's run campaigns, that's fundraised. So I knew I had, like I said, a core team when I started to do that. But even you can have all the people in the world like hyping you up to run. As Sam said earlier, even when you go to your family and start asking for money, that money thing does not come together. And to be a legitimate candidate, and I think it's unfortunate, and it's a bit counter to democracy, is you do have to raise money. You do have to raise a lot of money. So in my exploratory period, I was also getting pledges from people that would contribute to the campaign. And that's how I knew, again, just working day in and day out, that's how I knew that I had a legitimate campaign, and I had the confidence to go forward with it.
So I have one more question. The political dialogue right now is absolutely exhausting. It's nonstop. It's all intense. It's all controversial. And I imagine that the ups and downs of a campaign are also really intense and never ending. How do you guys stay grounded through that? How do you stand in the middle of this storm and have the stamina to get through this?
Yeah. Again, I'm in a local election. We very often, let me not say very often. I actually didn't get asked if I was a Democrat or a Republican until probably 3 weeks into my campaign. People just did not seem to care more so than they cared about job opportunities and crime in my city. There's a lot of Republicans on my team. I'm a Democrat. The national dialogue is very depressing if you're looking at it, but the good news is, again, at the local level where we can really effectuate the most change, people aren't that polarized. People really want to work together to get after things. So yeah, that's how I deal with it. I get to put out the symbol into the community that Democrats and Republicans are very much the same. There's, again, more overlap than there are differences. And that's the way I'm kind of pushing back against that.
Yeah, sure. Sam, do you?
I stay grounded through the community and the local needs. And even after my personal campaign for county committee was done, I volunteered on other campaigns because I wanted to continue door knocking and meeting the people in the neighborhood and figuring out what their issues were and why, whether they took part in the political system, what made them take part, what forced them to become involved, or if they weren't a part of the system, or if they didn't vote, again, why not vote? Why not take part in something that could potentially cause change for the better in your neighborhood? So again, in campaigning and going from door to door, I will hear the works, right? People will tell me about, their car broke down and it was towed and how can I help with that? And then you let them know I can't, right? But this is what I can do for you in the neighborhood. And people will refer back to the much larger elections where they said, I haven't felt that a presidential campaign helped me in the past 10 years. And that's both across party lines, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, they feel like the presidency hasn't helped them in particular in the past 10 years. And then that's when I have the conversation, again, bringing it back from what you see on news outlets, CNN, and what you may read in the New York Times, and I bring it back to, well, this is why we need to get involved at this level. We need to change the conversation and the dynamics at this level and hope that it carries up, right? It's only through your local elections and through voting and through taking a part in the active system, right? People believe that you show up to the polls, you check the block, you submit your poll, and then everything's gonna change. It's then that, I'm able to convey that politics, politics, and representation is it's a year-round thing, right? If you have an issue, you should write to your local elected officials and say, hey, this is how I feel. If they don't hear that out, you get 10 neighbors and you put all your names on one ballot and say, hey, we're all these 10 people, all these 10 households are going to the polls on this day. Remember when I brought this up? What is your plan to address it? So that's how I sort of gear the conversation back to local politics and how it can therefore change the much larger scale of things.
Was that the last question?
That was the last question.
Okay, I don't want to get
it.
the last word, but I would be remiss if I didn't congratulate you all on being selected to the Tillman. I've done a lot of things in my life, but the Tillman organization is, head and shoulders above most of that. It's one of the proudest organizations that I'm a part of, and you have a great opportunity. Yeah, we get scholarship money, but I tell everybody at the end of the day, this is a family, and you're going to get way more value out of being in this family. So I've been getting beat up by my team about flying up to Chicago to come and speak to people that can't vote for me. But honestly, it's because I really love this organization. And I love Keel and Kara and my classmates that are here. So really take advantage of those around you, and I have to tell you, you are the best in our society. So whatever you want to do, please go out there, be bold, be leaders, and let's really lead our country.
And you'll both be around this afternoon?
Yeah, we'll
Yes,
do.
people come talk to you.